Good evening, Dr. Shervani. This is my final presentation, my final project presentation for Comms 4800. I'm going to be talking about kinesics. It's also called body language. These are culturally influenced and also influenced by gender roles, facial expressions, or body movements that accent or convey a meaning to go along with verbal conversation. And there will be 5 types that I'll be talking about: emblems, illustrators, affect displays, regulators, and adapters. Okay, starting with emblems. Emblems are signals that we give that are translatable into words. These are very culturally dependent. They differ from culture to culture. A good example of this is the A-OK sign. And in English, in American culture, if you want to signal to somebody that everything's alright, you throw up one of these. And we translate that as OK because it looks like an O and a K. In other cultures, this can mean something considerably more graphic and nasty, which we won't get into, but you can assume as much. Another less nice one in our culture is flipping somebody off or flipping someone the bird, which I don't need to do. I'm sure you've seen that before. That's our way of signifying to another person, that we want them to have a not so nice day. Another excellent example is a pinky promise. Oftentimes children will grasp each other's pinkies as a pinky promise when they're making promises. And that's so ingrained in our culture that even sticking up a pinky when you're telling someone that you promise, that's enough for them to know that you're saying I promise. You don't even have to say I promise. You just look at them and say, give one of these, and they know, okay, pinky promise. Another one is the peace sign or the victory sign. Now this can have different meanings amongst other cultures. Richard Nixon famously got into trouble for this back in the 1970s when he went to China. He threw up a peace sign because he was the first president that had gone to China in quite some time. And the Chinese didn't appreciate that because it meant something different in their culture that they didn't like. This can also mean victory because it looks like the Latin letter V. We have won. Victory is ours. Another example for Star Trek people out there is the live long and prosper sign. I'm not much into Star Trek myself, but I know enough to know that that means live long and prosper. That's a good emblem. Illustrators are gestures that accent or reinforce what we're trying to say. A good example for our culture is pointing at something. It's okay. It's not the least bit impolite to point at an inanimate object in our culture. If you're in a warehouse or something and you want to tell your friend or your coworker about a box that's leaking oil, if you're in, for instance, an automobile or an automotive warehouse, you can point to the box and say, that's the box up there, or that's the box over there, that's the box down there, and that's perfectly fine. What you don't want to do, though, is you never want to point at another person that you're not willing to have in on the conversation or that you don't know personally. You never point at a complete stranger. That's considered very impolite. For instance, if you're out with a friend at the mall or something and someone's wearing a t-shirt of your favorite team and you want to tell them about it, you would simply reach over or crouch over to them and say, hey, they're wearing a t-shirt. You would never point at another person and say, that guy over there is wearing a t-shirt, because that's considered extremely impolite in our society. Another good example to indicate noise when telling a story would be pounding on a table. If you were telling your friend about a hunting trip and how a bear had climbed out onto the trail and surprised you, and it was very loud, you'd say the bear came out on the trail, and it scared us. It was that loud. Another excellent example, and perhaps you're not familiar with this one, but if you follow professional ice hockey, there's a goaltender named Ilya Bryzgalov, and he was giving an interview last year to the media, and he sort of delved off topic and was talking about his interest in astrophysics and the universe, and when asked why he was so interested in it, he looked at the reporter and said, "It's because it's so humongous big," to illustrate just how big the universe was. These can be helpful for non-native language speakers. On to affect displays. Affect displays are displays of facial, the body movement or facial expression that convey an emotional meaning. Posture is one thing that we look at right away. In our society, somebody who holds their shoulders and their head high is considered confident. It's implicit in the posture. We see somebody like this and we think, that person has it going on, they're very confident in themselves. Likewise, when somebody has their head down all the time, doesn't want to look up, or has their shoulders shrugged, we think that person must not be very confident in themselves because they're not going out of their way to be noticed. Facial movements as well, such as grinning, are a part of this. When you grin, people usually assume that you're happy. If you're maybe not in a great mood and everybody else can detect it, you know, say your friend tells you a joke and you're sitting there with your head down, but you look up and smile, then they automatically know that you're in a better mood. Likewise, if somebody says something and you look at them and frown or, you know, get a little upset, then they're going to know that was not a polite thing to say. Body movement can play a part in this as well. When someone is extremely excited or antsy, they're said to be bouncing off the walls. They can't sit down. You know, they kind of have to move around a bunch. Children do this a lot when they're excited for something. And sometimes these can go with emblems as well. For instance, the victory or the number 1 sign when people are really happy after a football game or something. You see this with coaches all the time. When they win a championship, they'll run out onto the field or the court and they'll smile and give the number 1 sign or the victory sign. Also, this can happen when people are upset too. If you're scowling at somebody and you're upset and you pull up a fist like you're going to hit them, that's an emblem that they can translate into you saying, "Please stop or I'm going to hit you." Regulators help to control how we talk to each other in personal conversation. For instance, nodding your head in agreement is a good sign to somebody that you're paying attention to what they say. Now, this can have the effect, if you do it too much, of people assuming you're being disingenuous. If you're nodding your head all the time, people think that it's going in one ear and out the other ear, so to speak. If somebody's speaking too quickly or they're not giving you a turn to speak, you can raise your hand up like you want them to be quiet. Please be quiet. Also, if someone asks you, for instance, if you want to take a turn talking or if you have an opinion, what do you think about this, Joe? Oftentimes we'll say, no, you go ahead. We'll wave our palm at them to let them go. And then finally, adapters. These are subconscious things. We don't consciously recognize these usually. These can come from learned experiences in our past. For instance, if you grew up with a father who liked to negotiate a lot with people on every little thing, and oftentimes your father would fold his hands, it's entirely possible that any time you have to negotiate something with somebody, you'll fold your hands. Likewise, if your mother or sister or anybody really grew up when you were growing up, whenever they talk to somebody face to face, if they tap their fingers around, it's possible that you'll you'll have learned this behavior and exhibit it yourself. Sometimes students, when they're getting ready to take tests, they'll chew on pens or pencils or anything they can get their hands on. These are important behaviors because they can cue listeners and observers in on our emotions. Even though we don't consciously recognize what we're doing, we can oftentimes tell how other people are feeling based upon their adapters. As I said, students oftentimes chew on pencils, and that's a good sign that they're antsy or nervous about a test.